Every like and every new subscriber is a reminder that I'm not sharing these stories in vain. Thank you for being here. Now, listen closely. They say love makes you blind. But what if the person you're marrying is staring past you the whole time, focused on someone else? I was her husband, but I was never the man she wanted. And when the truth hit me, it didn't just break my heart. It woke up something I didn't know I had. I met her on a Tuesday, the kind of day you forget unless something unforgettable happens. The sky was moody, gray with patches of light breaking through like some half-hearted apology from the weather. I had just left a lunch meeting downtown and stopped by a small bookstore on a side street. I wasn't looking for anything. Isn't that always how it starts? She was standing in the poetry section, flipping through a vintage edition of Neruda. Dark hair in a low knot, a green coat that fit too well to be accidental. I remember how she barely glanced at me, not out of indifference, but something else, like she was already aware of me, but didn't want me to know it. She caught me staring. She didn't smile, just raised an eyebrow, closed the book, and said, "That one's too soft." I laughed like an idiot. I didn't even know what poem she meant. I just knew I didn't want her to walk away. Her name was Sienna, a name that sounded like wine and mystery. She said it as if it weighed something. And when I told her mine, she nodded like she already knew it. We walked out of that bookstore together. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a nightcap. And by the time I realized how fast things were moving, I didn't want to slow down. She had this way of looking at you, like you were the most interesting thing in the room, and also the one thing she might walk away from at any second. I had dated before, plenty of women, some serious, some not. But Sienna was different. She didn't chase or wait to be chased. She moved like she had her own orbit and let you step into it only if she felt like it. I found it intoxicating. Within a month, she moved into my apartment. Within 2, we were talking about houses, dogs, someday kids. She wasn't eager, just deliberate. Every moment with her felt like it had been designed. Like she wasn't reacting, she was directing. And I was just happy to play the part. I told my friend she was it, the one. I remember saying, "It's like she fits my life too perfectly, like I've known her forever." One of them joked, "Maybe she studied you." We laughed. But now I wonder, what if love at first sight is just manipulation in a beautiful dress? Back then, everything felt easy. Too easy. She never questioned my schedule, never argued about plans. She slid into my world like she had always belonged there. But she never let me into hers. She didn't talk much about her past. When I asked, she said things like, "Nothing worth retelling," or "It's all chapters I've closed." I respected that. Who doesn't have scars they don't want poked at? But still, there were blanks. Friends I never met. Places she never wanted to revisit. A social media account that disappeared the week we got serious. "I want this to be private," she said. Real. And I believed her. We were happy, or at least I was. We cooked together. Traveled. She made everything feel cinematic. Sunday mornings with jazz and sunlight. Wine on rooftops. Handwritten notes left in my jacket pocket before business trips. She made me feel like the main character in a love story I hadn't realized I was starring in. And then came the proposal. It wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet evening on the balcony, the city blinking beneath us. I didn't even plan it. The words just came out. And when she said yes, she didn't cry. She just looked at me with this stillness I couldn't quite place and said, "Of course." Looking back, that should have been a clue. Of course. Not yes. Not a tearful nod. Just confirmation. We married 6 weeks later. Small ceremony. Close friends. Minimal press. She said she didn't like attention. She wore a cream dress with no veil, no bouquet. Just red lips and sharp eyes that never left mine. But something strange happened that day. After the ceremony, when we stepped aside to take photos near the water, I noticed her glance over her shoulder. Twice. Not toward her parents. not toward our guests, just toward the path, as if waiting for someone who never came. I asked if she was okay. She smiled. Just cold, she said, but it was 78 degrees. That night, while she danced with her maid of honor, I looked around the room. Everyone was happy, tipsy, celebrating, but something in me felt off, like a sound I couldn't hear but could still feel, a low vibration of unease. I shook it off. Why would I question joy? Because joy, when staged too perfectly, starts to look like theater. Our honeymoon was beautiful. Tuscany, vineyards, quiet towns. She loved history, took photos of churches, but never of us. When I asked why, she said, I want this to live in memory, not in pixels. Poetic, convincing. But a few days after we returned, I noticed her browsing an old Facebook album, one I didn't recognize. She closed the tab quickly, smiled, kissed me, and said, just deleting old junk. Still, I remembered the name at the top of the screen. Landon. She never mentioned a Landon. I told myself not to be paranoid. Everyone has an ex. Maybe he was part of that nothing worth retelling. But something about the way she closed the laptop stayed with me. Like she wasn't deleting a memory. She was rehearsing her next move. Marriage, they say, doesn't change people. It just shows who they really are. But what happens when the person you marry is playing a role so well, even you believe it? The first few months were quiet. Too quiet. No drama. No friction. No fights about towels or whose turn it was to make coffee. We were polite, harmonious, controlled. And yet, I started to feel like a guest in my own life. Sienna moved through our home like a queen through her palace. Elegant, efficient, always composed. She managed every corner of our lives with ease. Bills paid, appointments scheduled, groceries stocked without me ever seeing a list. It was like she had anticipated everything before it happened. At first, I thought, God, I'm lucky. What man wouldn't want a partner that capable, that seamless? But over time, I realized there was no room for me. She never left messes, never forgot anything, never tripped or stumbled or cracked. She never even raised her voice. It was as if she lived with me while floating just above the floor. Present, but untouchable. And then came the glances. We'd be out at a restaurant, and she'd freeze for a second, eyes locked on someone across the room. A flicker of something would pass over her face, and she'd blink it away. I asked her once what she was thinking. She said, nothing, and smiled like a curtain falling. But I knew better. I began to notice that same look when certain names came up in conversation, names I didn't recognize, people I'd never met. A painter, a gallery owner, a mutual friend from back home. There'd be a pause, a tightening in her jaw. Then she'd move on. And always that same name showed up in the story she didn't tell. Landon. I saw it again in an envelope one afternoon, left open on the kitchen table. A save-the-date card for an art show. The name at the bottom, Landon Reed. I stared at it for minutes. The date was circled in red ink, something she never did for any of our bills or events. When I asked her about it that evening, she shrugged. Oh, she said casually, I used to know him. He's harmless. Used to know him. But the ink was fresh. The week of the event, she became different. She fussed over her outfits. She redid her hair twice a day. She spent hours in the mirror, only to say she wasn't going anywhere. I asked if she was planning to attend the gallery show. She said no, too busy, not her scene anymore. The night of the opening, she said she had dinner with an old girlfriend. I didn't push, but a part of me, the part one didn't like, checked her location after midnight. She was in West Hollywood, right next to the gallery. I sat in the dark living room, phone in hand, watching that tiny blue dot pulse on the screen like a heartbeat I didn't trust. And I asked myself something I hadn't dared to say aloud. Was I really her husband, or just a shadow she used to cast out on someone else? The next morning, she was radiant, sweater off one shoulder, hair in perfect disarray, coffee already made. She kissed my cheek, hummed while slicing fruit. It was all too clean, too choreographed, like she knew what guilt looked like and was doing the exact opposite. I went to work, but I didn't think about emails or deadlines. I thought about how much I didn't know the woman I shared a bed with, about how I had mistaken attention for affection, about the way she'd glance at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, smile faintly, then lock it like a secret. That evening, I check her Instagram. She hadn't posted since the honeymoon, but her followers list had grown. A lot. I scroll through the new ones, artists mostly, photographers, a couple of gallery accounts, and one profile with no photo, no name, just a string of numbers. I tapped it. It followed exactly 3 people, a New York gallery, Sienna, and Landon Reed. I clicked his name. There he was, tall, blonde, bearded, smiling in that insufferable, I live in a loft and paint my feelings kind of way. His feed was full of close-up shots of textures, rain on glass, blurred faces. In one photo, just one, of a woman standing in front of a red canvas. Her back to the camera. But the green coat? It was hers. The caption, "Some muses never leave." My stomach twisted. I didn't show her. I didn't say a word. Instead, I watched. She started dressing differently. Neutrals, silks, heels for no reason. She spent longer on her makeup, yet insisted she wasn't going anywhere. She read more old books, poetry, the kind of things that once brought us together. But her laughter now had an edge. Not joyful, defensive, like she was daring me to ask what had changed. And still, I said nothing, because deep down, I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to admit I'd fallen for someone who was still haunted by someone else. Or worse, chasing them. A week later, I caught her standing on the balcony, phone in hand, crying. Quiet, trembling sobs. When she came back in, I asked if she was okay. She smiled. I just read something sad and walked past me like I wasn't even in the room. The thing about patterns is you don't see them when you're in them. They don't shout. They hum, quietly, predictably, like a song playing just beneath the surface of your thoughts. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It started with photographs. Not the kind she took of us, those were rare, but the kind that floated around her world like ghosts, snapshots that weren't meant for me to see. I noticed them on her phone, reflected in her laptop screen, buried in folders she never meant to open in front of me. Same man, same face, always in the background, always close enough to be real, but never close enough to explain. Landon. I didn't need her to confirm it. I knew. At first, I made excuses for her. Maybe they were old. Maybe she hadn't deleted them. Maybe she wasn't ready to throw away pieces of her past. And who was I to force it? But that logic faded fast, because the photos kept changing. They weren't static. They weren't digital leftovers. One of them had a timestamp. Recent. Too recent. A blurry shot of a gallery wall with her reflection faint in the glass. Another, her fingers curled around a wine glass, his hand not far off, cropped but unmistakable. She never sent them, never posted them, but they were there, stored, saved, like souvenirs from a war I didn't know we were fighting. And then I noticed something worse. She was happier in them, not glowing, not laughing, just lighter, like she wasn't pretending. The realization hit me like ice in the veins. Have you ever loved someone who was just using you as a weapon? That's what it felt like I was being aimed, pointed toward someone she couldn't hurt directly. I wasn't her partner. I was her performance. And suddenly, the past few months made perfect sense. Her charm, her intensity, the way she made everything seem cinematic. I used to think she loved life. Now I saw it clearly. She loved drama. She needed it like oxygen. And I had become her stage. I started going through her old things. not in a jealous rage, but like an investigator at the scene of a quiet crime. I wasn't looking for scandal. I was looking for confirmation. In the back of a closet drawer, I found a shoebox. Inside, letters. Handwritten, dozens. Some crumpled, some neat. All in the same slanted handwriting I didn't recognize. I sat on the bedroom floor and read them for hours. They weren't addressed to her. They weren't from her. They were written by her to him. Years of emotions spilled across pages that had never been sent. Rage, regret, desperation, and most of all, vengeance. The tone shifted over time. Early letters begged for closure. Later ones plotted out a kind of justice I didn't know she was capable of. One line burned itself into my memory. If I can't have his heart, I'll rip his ego from the inside out. She never mentioned a breakup, never told me she had been betrayed. But these weren't letters from a woman grieving a lost love. They were plans, blueprints, and I was in the middle of them. The last letter in the box was dated 2 weeks before our wedding. In it, she wrote, "He'll see me walk down that aisle. Maybe not in person, maybe through a photo, but he'll know. He'll know I moved on, and not with a rebound, with someone stronger, smarter, bigger." I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. I was bigger. I was the proof, the message. She didn't love me. She needed me to make someone else suffer. I closed the box and sat there in the quiet, my heart pounding like a warning bell. And yet, I didn't leave, not right away, because anger, as loud as it is, can't drown out heartbreak. And betrayal doesn't always make you walk. Sometimes it makes you freeze, paralyzed in disbelief, praying for some detail that changes the meaning of everything. But there was no detail, only a woman asleep in the other room, her breathing steady, her phone screen lighting up with another message she wouldn't let me see. The next day, I started watching her differently, not like a husband, but like an outsider. I noticed how she'd pause before answering simple questions, like she was calculating how to stay on script. I noticed how she wore the same perfume every time she went out with friends, the one she never wore around me. I noticed how she always locked her laptop now, even if she was just going to the kitchen. I didn't confront her, because now I had a plan. I made copies of the letters, scanned them, saved them to a hidden drive. I started documenting everything, every change in behavior, every name she mentioned twice, every lie she told so smoothly it sounded like truth. I tracked her movements, her social media logins, her credit card activity. It wasn't obsession, it was preparation, because if I was her weapon, it was time she realized weapons can be turned around. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything fell into place. Funny how the biggest moments in life don't always come with thunder or fanfare. Sometimes they arrive with a simple buzz, a text notification that wasn't supposed to land in your hands. Sienna had left her phone on the kitchen counter. That never happened. She guarded it like a vault, always on silent, always face down. But this time, she was in the shower, and I was standing 5 feet away when it lit up. One name, Landon, and 4 words that changed everything. He suspects. Be careful. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I just stared. The phone dimmed. The moment burned into my mind like a brand. She had been talking to him. Still, all this time. And not just talking, planning, managing. She had never let him go. I heard the water shut off. My heart should have pounded. My hand should have shaken. But instead, I felt calm. Cold but clear. She walked out, wrapped in a towel, humming something low. She didn't notice me at first. When she did, she smiled, that perfect practice smile. I smiled back, and that's when I knew this wasn't just betrayal. This was design. She hadn't just used me emotionally. She had kept the line open to the man who shattered her, to monitor his pain, to keep herself relevant in his world, even if from a distance. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't playing defense anymore. That night, while she slept, curled on her side, phone tucked under the pillow like a secret. I copied everything. Photos, contact, emails, screenshots. I used a data recovery tool I had downloaded for an old hard drive. It worked better than I expected. Deleted messages, hidden files, drafts she'd never sent. One folder was named then slash and now. It contained side-by-side photos. One of her with Landon, years ago. The other, her and me, same pose, same setting, different smiles. A mirror of her past, copied into her present. It wasn't coincidence. She was staging her life with me as a replica of her time with him. The way we traveled, the cafes she insisted on, the books we read together, all reenactments. Subtle, curated, like she wanted him to see it and feel something, envy, regret, rage. It didn't matter, as long as he felt it. And I was her echo, her canvas, her lie. So I made a choice. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet, because now I had the one thing she never expected, narrative control. I reached out to a friend of mine, someone in media, not a gossip journalist, a storyteller, a podcaster with millions of listeners and a love for true, raw accounts of heartbreak and healing. I sent him the letters, the photos, the timeline. He called me the next morning, speechless. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. "I've never been more sure. We planned a release. No names, no faces, just the story, told from my point of view, unfiltered, honest, brutal. And once it went live, I sat back and watched it spread like wildfire. People listened. They wept. They got angry. Some recognized the patterns in their own lives. Others messaged me anonymously to say, "Thank you. You said what I couldn't." And just like that, the narrative changed. I wasn't the fool anymore. I was the one who survived. And if you've been here with me from the beginning, reading this, following every twist and detail, subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next? You won't want to miss it. Sienna noticed the shift quickly. She became quieter, slower, like the air around her had thickened. One morning, she asked me, "Are we okay?" I looked her in the eye and said, "We're exactly what we've always been." She nodded. She didn't ask again. And that night, I watched her sneak out of the apartment. She didn't know I followed her. Didn't see me standing across the street, parked in the dark, as she stepped into a quiet hotel lobby. Didn't see me snap the photo of her hand in his. But the world would. Soon. There's a particular kind of silence that exists just before a truth is revealed. Not the absence of sound, but rather a stillness that hums beneath the surface of everything, a breath held by the universe itself, waiting for the drop that cracks the calm. I had never planned on exposing her so publicly, but when the opportunity presented itself so poetically, so perfectly, I knew I couldn't waste it. We had received an invitation to a gallery opening. It wasn't just any opening, it was his. Landon Reed, in all his moody, self-constructed genius, was unveiling a new collection entitled Afterimage. How fitting, I thought. An entire exhibit dedicated to lingering things, shadows of past choices, fragments of people who refused to disappear. Sienna tried to play it cool when she opened the envelope, but I noticed the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly and how her gaze lingered on the invitation just a second too long before she tucked it away with a rehearsed shrug and said she wasn't interested in pretentious art scenes anymore. She was lying, and I knew it. I didn't press her. Instead, I told her I'd be attending alone, feigning interest in the networking opportunity, pretending not to notice how that decision set off a flicker of panic in her eyes, one she quickly disguised behind a smirk and a nonchalant, "Have fun." The night of the event arrived like a curtain rising on a final act, the air thick with expectation, energy tingling like static against the skin, every detail of the evening layered with hidden meanings only I could now interpret. I wore a suit darker than night, custom fitted, crisp, and silent as sin. Not to impress anyone, but because armor doesn't always come with steel or leather. Sometimes it's woven into your presence, tailored with intention, pressed with quiet fury. The gallery was exactly what you'd expect. Minimalist walls, dim lighting, champagne flutes held with fingers more polished than personalities, and conversations that floated like smoke, empty and beautifully framed. And then I saw her. Not with me, not in disguise, but glowing, radiant in that way a person becomes when their illusions are working in their favor. She was already there, standing across the room beside him, the two of them whispering in the space between two pieces of abstract emotion splattered on canvas. She didn't even try to hide it this time, and honestly, that made it easier. I didn't approach them right away. I wanted her to feel safe, to believe, even if just for a few more minutes, that her games had worked. I walked the room slowly, greeting people who thought they knew me, smiling at critics who had reviewed my performances like dissections, sipping champagne I didn't want and waiting for the right moment. It came when the spotlight shifted quite literally to the center of the room. Landon stood up to speak, smug, aloof, dripping with self-importance. He thanked the guests, the sponsors, his team, and then said something about how this collection was born from personal rupture, betrayal, and the long echo of choices made in the dark. Oh, the irony. When he finished, polite applause broke the air and guests began to drift toward the featured pieces. That's when I made my move, not toward Sienna, not toward Landon, but toward the heart of the room. And from the inside pocket of my suit, I pulled out a flash drive. I found the nearest assistant, someone holding a tablet and looking overwhelmed, and I simply said, "I've got a short film the artist requested we show tonight." Very last minute. "He'll know." The man hesitated, then nodded, likely assuming I was a manager or agent. Power is often mistaken for confidence. He plugged the drive into the projector, and then the room dimmed again. On the wall, where once hung a canvas dripping in vague reds and desperate brushstrokes, a video began to play. But not a film, a montage. Letters scanned and slowly scrolled across the screen. Photos side by side. Sienna with Landon, Sienna with me. Identical in setting, posture, framing, but vastly different in expression. Her messages, his replies, her voice in a faint recording I had recovered, saying he doesn't even know he's part of it, but he'll make Landon feel it. Every single time. Gasps began to spread like wildfire, low and quick and sharp. Murmurs followed. People turned. Faces froze. Some guests stopped breathing for several seconds. Sienna went still like a sculpture. Landon paled. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And I stood just outside the spotlight, watching it unfold with a calm that surprised even me. Not because I enjoyed it, but because it was the first time I had acted for myself, not for the audience. The video ended with one final image, a close-up of the words written in her journal. He'll never see it coming. Silence. Then confusion. Then whispers. And then her name began to float through the crowd like broken glass. Beautiful, sharp, impossible to ignore. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked out slowly, chin high, trying to salvage what she could from the wreckage. But some lies don't shatter, they incinerate. I left soon after. No go-onbis. No follow-ups. Because the performance was over. And for once, I wasn't the one being watched. Closure doesn't always arrive as justice, or even clarity. Sometimes it shows up as exhaustion, the kind that wraps around your spine and reminds you that carrying the weight of other people's damage isn't noble. It's unnecessary. That was what I felt in the days after the gallery reveal. Not triumph, Not revenge, just a hollow relief, like taking off a costume that had grown too tight. Sienna didn't return home that night, nor the one after. I didn't text her. I didn't ask where she was. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was honest. She left a few things behind, scattered like the remains of a character no longer needed. A silk scarf draped over a chair, a half-read novel on the windowsill, perfume still whispering from the pillow she hadn't slept on in weeks. I boxed it all without ceremony, not from anger, but because her presence had been an illusion too carefully maintained. The public didn't need to know who she was. I never named her, not once in the podcast, in the story that spread like wind over dry grass. But those who needed to know, those who lived through their own versions of her, they recognized the mask. And they responded. Messages poured in. Men, women, even strangers who had nothing but a vague ache and the language to name it now. They didn't want gossip. They wanted resonance, to feel less alone in their betrayal. And I thought to myself, isn't that why we tell stories in the first place? I spent the following weeks unlearning her, the routines I'd shaped around her habits, the way I cooked breakfast, the routes I took home, the playlists we had shared that I now deleted without hesitation. It felt like reclaiming a version of myself I hadn't spoken to in years. Eventually, I moved out of the apartment into something smaller, quieter, a space without echoes. She reached out once. A text. No apology. Just 2 words. You won. I didn't respond because there were no winners in this. There were only survivors. But if you've made it this far into my story, if you've followed the unraveling, the pattern, the play within the play, then let me ask you one last question. What would you do if the person you loved treated you like a tool and you finally held the script? Would you burn it, rewrite it, or walk away? I chose the last one, not because I was above her, not because I didn't want vengeance, but because some stories aren't worth finishing. I'm writing this now from a place without shadows, without cameras, without red carpets or painted-on perfection. A place where I can finally breathe without checking who might be watching. And for the first time, I'm not performing. Fade in on a life that's finally mine. Fade out